above target. General fund variance is positive 1.5 million. We have improvements in the sheriff department from last year. The special revenue funds we talked about, right now we're showing a total net negative variance of 1.2 million. And we have a variance expected to turn positive after fire district revision to budget additional revenue. And finally, mental health we talked about, so they project to be 2 million over, but they have a lot of change in the system going on right now.
All right, thanks, Mr. Alvarez. Ms. Miyasato has a comment, and then Supervisor Farr.
Chair Wolf and Supervisors, I just wanted to go back just quickly because I had some new information about answering Supervisor Farr's question about the custody deputies. The sheriffs had said that 16 custody deputy graduates were included in our staff numbers, so the 7 vacant positions that we show in the custody deputy vacancies already taken into account those 16 that were newly hired.
Okay, so the 7 are in addition to the 16. If
Correct.
they didn't have the 16, the number would have been
That's correct.
higher. Okay.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Farr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Alvarez, I just want some clarification. So the general fund projects a 1.5 million favorable variance when compared to the adopted budget. And so then we got this great chart from Mr. Geis yesterday talking about, where we were with property taxes. And I can't remember the assumption that we made during budget as far as the growth in property tax. So was that already taken into account then when you did this?
When we did the budget, I think originally we had 4%, and it was determined to increase it by 0.5%. So we increased to 4.5%, and I think the final came in at 4.8, I want to say. Those are the gross numbers before the fire shift.
Okay.
So the actual came in a little bit higher than we budgeted, which is ideally where we want to be, a little bit.
Okay, and so that's where the 1.5 million comes in?
No, because that's the 4.5% was what we budgeted. Bob, I'm looking to you. I think that would have actually a little positive impact because we only budgeted at 4.5, so it should have a slightly positive impact.
Supervisor Farr, Madam Chair, I think I know where you're going with the question. And as we finish this tax increment worksheet, we have 2 factors that are coming into play. Well, how did we end last year? Because you adopted your budget before we ended. And then how's the budget performing this year? And how did we do the estimate of our calculations? Because if we just simply multiplied a budget on last year's budget and we came in over, we will have a little bit more money. And I think when we come out with the second quarter report, a preliminary look by us looks like we'll probably have a positive variance in the property taxes in the second quarter report. So we should do better, and we'll focus in a little bit more of your question about, well, there was our assumption in the budget, then there was Joe coming into the hearings, we made a change and adopted, used some of it, and then where are we in the process? And it takes us to get that tax increment before we can answer those questions.
Okay, that was exactly what I wanted to know. So the next quarter update will be able to marry these together.
Yeah, the other thing that happens is November 30th is the end of the assessment appeals process. And so then it takes us some time to evaluate assessment appeals and say, oh, will we lose money, and do I have to recommend to you guys to impound taxes? And so we'll go through that process too. And unfortunately, we didn't get to that till about May of last year. So we'll try and speed that up a little, and especially look for any big impounds that might occur.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Any other questions? Supervisor Carbajal?
Thank you. Mr. Guys, could I recently saw an article that was raising the issue of the impact that the oil pipeline loss of tax revenue would have on government, in particular schools. And it obviously seemed to not have all the facts. And I'm just wondering how that injury to their districts. So I'm just wondering, one question is how it impacts us or not. And 2, the broader question is to our CEO and council, how we might be able to send a letter or convene a workshop to let all these government entities who might be impacted to know their rights to submit a claim, to make sure there's no statute of limitations that's missed, and to make sure that they're getting the revenues for their schools in particular?
That's an interesting question. That's a loaded question. And oil is a very complicated subject. I think Tom has a couple of slides that he wants to address it. But just let me bring up a couple of broad things. You know, last year, using those tax increment worksheets, the price of oil dropped the assessments from 20 million to 15 million. Just simply the price of oil that went from 100 and something down to $58. So Mr. Holland, and I don't know if he's here today, but you know, Mr. Holland counseled on us on that in an internal meeting to say the biggest thing that could affect oil is the price of oil. For some of the production, not all of the production. And here's a good example. The price of oil significantly affected the assessment of the Veneco facility. That Veneco facility is in a tax rate area that includes the general fund, the fire district, and Goleta Union School District. And on the way up here, I was trying to figure out some of the answers to your question and said, the biggest loser in taxes percentage-wise on the price of oil for Veneco was the Goleta Union School District, which...
Madam Chair? Madam Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
But what you're saying is it's the price of oil that is hurting the type of revenues that we're getting, not the pipeline.
Well, that was last year.
All right.
The pipeline assessment and that assessment process will happen January of this year. And so the oil companies will be submitting information to Mr. Holland, and that assessment is done differently because all the oil for Exxon and the Freeport gas facility, that oil's out in federal waters. And so the price of oil doesn't have as a dramatic effect on the production facilities. So Exxon Los Flores is a production facilities. Chevron Freeport is a production facility, and that assessment process is different based on the value of the plant, based on production, and probably the price of oil does have an impact on production. But I'm not Joe Holland, and what I get to do in my role as auditor, and I have to be careful, is once these assessments are done, and then once any assessment appeals may or may not be filed, I have to make a different evaluation of the value of those taxes and impound decisions to you. So I have to be kind of careful for me speculating on what's going to happen on those assessments until the facts are in. And I've been in the middle of these discussions back in the early 90s with when the Exxon facility came online. And we were forced out to many of the school districts. I had a really good, affiliation with the San Ynez High School District, and Fred Van Leuven, who was the superintendent, because their district was really affected by the price of oil, were affected by the oil settlement. So you're right. Entities with a smaller tax base, like Goleta Union School District, that has a $24 million in taxes, if they get $1 million decline in the price of oil, that really affected them. We looked today and said, did San Ynez High School District get affected by the price of oil? And they didn't, because Veneco's not in their district, but Exxon, Freeport, McMoran is. So maybe next year they're going to get a big effect. And they're a $24 million school district, and that could have a big effect on them too. The Santa Barbara High School District was affected by the drop in the price of oil this year, but they have a $100 million tax base, so it wasn't as great as Goleta. And then the general fund has a piece of every tax rate area, so we were affected by the drop in the price of oil. And then our fire protection district does not go into every tax rate area, so they're affected a little differently. And so we can give that information out. It's public information, and it's easy to give out the public information about what happened this year when we just have it. And so we've shared all that tax information with additional various spreadsheets with the taxing agencies. They have the information. My tax manager meets with the fiscal folks at the county schools, and he will be going out and explaining those tax sheets. And so internally to county schools, that will feed back up the line. Joe and I have gone out in past, Joe Holland, the assessor, and met with school districts. So if they want to meet with us, we're happy to get out there. And I've been with those school districts, and when oil starts fluctuating, they will call us. I don't know if that helps with the question, but
Madam Chair, it does, because I think you've helped me also better understand the price of oil. The reduction in the price of oil has really impacted various entities and schools. But that's different, and that's what we're experiencing now, and you're trying to educate the districts on how they will be impacted. But that's different than the pipeline and how that will impact these government entities further in the future. And what I was saying is, for that second part, the pipeline impact, the claims process is one that we want to educate, I think, all the schools about what is the process and how they could submit a claim for that second injury that is related to the pipeline. But certainly, we can't do anything about the price of oil. Some might argue we can, but I don't think so when you look at the global market and the pricing of oil.
Madam Chair and Supervisor Carbajal, I'll step down from my role as county auditor and go to somebody that better understands the claim process, and that would be Mr. Gazzoni, about the ability to file a claim. I will say this, when you go to file a claim and understand which part was related to the lack of production in the oil thing and what part was related to, again, the change of price of oil, because oil dropped again this year, it will be an interesting calculation, and there will be differences of opinion, just like in the assessment appeals process, over the value of that production. And I see Mr. Holland's here, and he knows a lot more about assessing oil than I do.
But Mr. Gazzoni, if I could, because we had talked about this, my understanding is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there will be some outreach with the school districts and some of the other agencies about the claims process, that you might be available for that.
Chair Wolf and supervisors, I think the county's outreach process began the first Tuesday after the oil spill, and part of that included describing in general terms in this very room the claims process that was available both to individuals and to other government agencies. And for school districts or other districts, they at 10,000 feet do have the ability to claim either under the state Limpert-Keene C-Strand statute or the Federal Oil Pollution Act for lost tax revenues caused by the spill. We have been looking at that as to the county, if the county has lost oil tax revenues. And with Mr. Holland here, I'll just say at 10,000 feet, the whole issue of assessing oil or property tax for oil entities is very complicated. The state has a special tax rule just for that. Production is a significant factor, but not the only factor. And as the assessor looks at that, they look at not just what's being produced, but if something's not being produced, what costs are not being incurred by the company when they're not producing, and the asset still stays in the ground. So I think it's early for us to estimate whether or to what extent the county would have a loss on that. I have talked briefly with the CEO after your question the other day about school districts. And yes, my office and with whatever other staff are certainly available to discuss this process. And we've also reached out to the State of California Oil Spill Prevention Response, which sometimes will bundle claims or submit claims on behalf of local agencies to see if that's an option for them. I think at this point, our theme would be early days in terms of potential lost oil revenue or to lost oil tax revenue for the county or for any of the districts in the county. But as you know, we've discussed with the board the interim claims that the county has been submitting first in two categories: removal costs and increased cost of county services. The county initially submitted its claim number 1 for about $386,000 and received all of that back. And then at the end of October, submitted its claim number 2 for about $1.23 million for those two categories. And this was a significant effort by auditor's office, my office, general services, and the board to get this going, so we would have current value of that money coming back, and we will be prepared both for the county's potential lost tax revenue claims or to assist and discuss with other agencies.
That's great. And I think it was highlighted that this is going to be very complicated and complex. So I think whatever assistance your office can provide would be greatly appreciated. Supervisor Farr, then Supervisor Adam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, that's just exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I think that we have all these departments that are working on this issue. Mr. Geis's department, Mr. Holland's department, county council, to help the county navigate the claims process and also to come up with the appropriate calculation for the amount of money that we're going to need to claim for, for the losses. And so I do think it's important that the county does do outreach to county schools, and I think also to the special districts associations, because that's a way to reach all of the special districts, whose losses may not end up totaling as big an amount as some of the school districts, but still is very important to them. And to have county council help them understand how to claim, but I think it's also going to be important for Mr. Holland and Mr. Geis to help them understand what the amounts are that they should claim. And I would think that that would be proportional to whatever the amounts that the county is going to be claiming, because that's going to be a very complex process, and certainly in both areas totally foreign to what the special districts and the school districts normally are about. So I think in whatever way the county can assist all of the districts, the school districts and the special districts that need to submit a claim, that's really important work for us to do.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Adam.
Is Mr. Geis trying
Madam
to
Chair
respond a little bit?
and Supervisor Farr, I just wanted to make the comment that, we want to set the expectations. We're there to help, but Joe's can get up here and speak for himself. His process doesn't even start till May. Once his process starts, it took me till November here to get to the actual tax distribution, and so, that process is kind of next year, and we can go out and give preliminary information and start the process and an internal discussion about what is that loss of production and what does it mean to the districts. I think we can start doing that, but we also would be very speculative to get out there to the districts and start throwing around a lot of numbers. We can look to the article in the paper that Supervisor Carbajal was doing with the California Economic Forecasts and Mark Schneep. And, Mark's got some assumptions in there, and I'm not ready to go out and argue with Mark Schneep. He's smarter than I am when it comes to economics. And that's based on a set of assumptions that he believes in. And so I'm not ready to go out and start arguing with those guys about what the real value is. His opinion is valuable, and I think it's valuable to the public, but it's going to be a while before we really know that.
And Madam Chair, I was not suggesting that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it seems like, there's two important points here. One, that people understand that they can claim, and what is that process and what is that timeline, and I think this is where County Counsel's office can be very helpful. I think the other piece is some months down the road when the county has a better understanding of what we would be claiming and what that process is from a financial standpoint. And then once that is understood for the county, I think it's much easier then to know what those amounts should be for any of the other districts that should be claiming as well. It's my understanding that there's a 3-year statute of limitations, so obviously, everybody needs to fall within that, but, it's not even been a year yet, so I think we're still probably okay.
Supervisor Adam.
Well, as everybody knows, I am not an attorney, but there are defenses to all these claims And I wouldn't get too excited about just because you put in a claim that gets paid dollar for dollar. I think that Plains is going to have a tremendous amount of defenses that they're gonna try and use there, and I wouldn't be counting my chickens before they're hatched.
Did you want to say something, Mr. Gazzoni?
Chair Wolf, just responding to Supervisor Farr's statement, yes, we work within the framework for this of a 3-year statute of limitations from the May spill. And we had reached out actually collegially with the city attorneys who might be affected just to let them know what we were doing. And I know comparably, the CEO reached out to city managers so that we're all going the same, or at least working with the same general information. Many of the districts, whether school districts or special districts, have standing arrangements with their council, whether on contract or on staff, but we'd be willing to work with them and share with them our approach on this, and would welcome phone calls or down the road do some outreach, whether it's go to a meeting or something like that and discuss the county's approach. We're fortunate that we have in our office experience in the oil area, and we'd be willing to share that with other folks.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Lavagnino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know we're kind of getting off on this, but I just have a question about, it just seems interesting to me, and like Supervisor Adam had said, that just because you put in a claim, not sure we're going to get it, but so if we had passed an oil extraction tax and the price of oil went down and the oil companies decided to pump less, we would not have a claim at that point, correct? Or if they decided, like on the pipeline, they just weren't going to use the pipeline anymore, where's our claim?
Chair Wolf and Supervisor Lavanino. So having said it's a 3-year statute of limitations and we're a few months into
Right.
the actual worrying about a year ahead of time on the potential lost tax component of this, I'll start with it's a strict liability statute. So once we establish that it's Plains oil that caused the problem, that's a good place to be, and that is the case. So we'll be working forward from that. There's different modeling that occurs to value this, but our starting point is that we would expect to see reimbursement either through the claims process or through the litigation process on the county's lost property tax revenues if those occur. And I again caution that as we look at oil at whatever price it's trading at right now, within the property tax rule that the assessor uses as part of his constitutional duty for full value, they would also be looking at the reduced cost. If there's no cost of production or transport, that comes in there also. So as the value of oil goes down and the oil company's saving money by not shipping, that is a significant factor.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Gazzoni. Do you have more slides, Mr. Alvarez? Did I understand that you have more?
Supervisor
Or are
Wolf,
you- are you
Chair, we
done?
had some more slides, but I think the board covered it in this discussion with Mr. Geis and Mr. Gazzoni on the impacts, but I think we've already covered them.
I think, yeah, we can
Okay.
touch on this.
All right. Do we have public speakers, Mr. Allen?
We have 2 requests to speak. Start in Santa Maria with Mr. Caldwell, then go to Santa Barbara for Dr. Johns. Mr. Caldwell?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm Andy Caldwell representing CoLab. I want to echo Supervisor Adam and Lavanino's comments about counting chickens. I think that something that people are glossing over here is Mr. Gazzoni mentioned the losses caused by the spill. Well, I have no doubt that emergency response and the temporary losses caused by the spill could be billed to the pipeline company. But what happens once the pipeline company fixed the pipeline? And what happens after they cleaned up the spill? Some people are estimating the feds are going to drag their feet 5 years. Do you think you're going to collect for 5 years after the pipeline company fixed the pipeline and cleaned up the spill? How are they liable once they fixed the pipeline and cleaned up the spill? How are they liable for how long the feds take to allow them to reopen a pipeline that's not leaking? We've never heard an answer to that question. If it's not leaking, how are they liable for losses to the county? And the other issue is the county's ability to have ameliorated their losses by allowing an emergency permit for trucking. Once you denied an emergency permit for trucking, how is that still billed to the oil company? I used to sit next to the smartest guy in class in math in high school because that was the only way I was getting through it. He used to tell me you want to see if there's something is true on the face, take it to an extreme. Let's say it took the feds 50 years to reopen that pipeline. Do you get to build, and the school district gets to build planes for the next 50 years? They could rebuild the pipeline, or Exxon could build a new pipeline within the 5 years. Is Plains still responsible for losses of this hypothetical pipeline that nobody's using anymore? This goes way deeper than we're going to just bill them. They're responsible for the spill. They cleaned up the spill. They fixed the pipeline. What happens then? I'd love for your attorney to espouse on that. Thank you.
Can I go to Santa Barbara?
Hold on, Mr. Adam.
Yeah, I would say that our attorney, it would be inappropriate for our attorney to talk about that. He's got a position that he's got to defend at this point, and that position was given to him by this board, and it's not his job to defend the position of this board. It's his job to defend the position that this board gives him. And so it would also be inappropriate for him to talk on the basis that he's not going to tell everybody what all his arguments are. So we don't expect our attorney to do any less than the best he can, and those are limitations that he has without him being able to tell you that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adam. Our next public speaker.
Dr. Johns in Santa Barbara. Dr. Johns.
Yeah, I'm here. Now,
If we could switch the camera to Santa Barbara, please.
yes, I'm here. This is an environmental, political, economic scheme to scam the corporations, the oil corporations. It's a scam. It's a manipulation. And anybody who proposes that they collect money for the oil spill is taking part in an environmentalist corrupt scheme. And you presented that corrupt scheme, Mr. Carvajal. Now, it really occurred to me that this subtle manipulation is part of the whole operation. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that this is what's been going on for years, part of the delusion. Now, let me turn to the sheriff. The sheriff has had his budget, he has had handcuffs on his budget for years. So it's hopefully that this Democratic majority will move on, and then we can begin to think about mental health and public safety. Because this past, the Democratic majority has always said, and that was a lie, we are for public safety. They lie. The most two important entities in this county is public safety and mental health. And now that we have a proper director who sees the future instead of defective thinking, and this person is still thinking, and all his thoughts are scams, schemes, defective. So I'm going to be very happy to get rid of this person. Get him out of here. And I'm going to get the federal government on him. So wherever he goes, a dog catcher in Carpinteria, the feds are coming to get you, baby. because you screwed up this mental health system. You screwed up the sheriff's system. It has to be, the whole system has to be changed around. And we're finally beginning to see the light, to see the real light. I still have 21 seconds. 21 minutes, I'd run all of you out of here. Now, so we are just beginning to make the turn, to go the way, and we've got to get rid of you Democratic majorities. Carbajal.
Thank you. Your
Bye.
time is up. All right. Do we have any other public speakers? Do we have
No further
comments from board members? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to accept and file.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 11:15, and then we'll hear from our women's commissioners.
I was hoping today it would be Supervisor Farr's day, but no, it's not. I just endorsed somebody by the way. For dog catcher.